What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Why We Roll, the tabletop role-playing game chat show from the Stillfleet Studio. As always, I am one of your co-hosts, Chris Pickett, and I am joined by my lovely friend, Wythe Marschall.
Hey, it's me.
Today we're sitting down with the designer of Journeyman, Zach Beer, to talk about, Journeyman, that game, which late players are still been on Kickstarter as of the time of recording, as well as Zach's history and other projects. So, hey, Zach, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Let's see, Wythe, you want to kick us off with an opener question?
Yeah, sure. And definitely, just acknowledging we're recording. It's in the summer. It's hot, so appreciate you both taking the time to sit down, close the doors, put on some cans. Get the head moisture going. Zach, it's great to see you. Zach, we've played some games together at cons and on the Discord. So it's nice to catch up and see that you published your own game in the meantime. So we kind of were talking about that online and thought we'd have you on and talk about the world of not just your game, but I think you can speak in an erudite manner to many RPGs. So we can kind of talk about this era and what is going on with kind of rules light, GMs becoming designers, making your own stuff, and how you've seen that evolution. Traditional first question is, Zach, who are you and how'd you get into games?
Well, thank you. I'm mostly a games player and runner, and then recently I had the opportunity to try and distill down all of that time and experience into what I hope captures my feelings about running and playing with minimal rules really well. I'm 50. I'll be 52 this year. I got my start with Moldvay basic D&D in 5th grade. So that was 81, I think. Must have been pretty much brand new, maybe 82. I bought it secondhand at a garage sale with my own money. It was amazing. I can only imagine that the person who had it had felt they already graduated up to advanced Dungeons and Dragons and
Maybe they were past the BX level. They had gone
right
to,
exactly
Champions, Eternals, Masters, but I forget the acronym for BX. Yeah.
Yes. Companion Masters and Immortals, BECMI. I was utterly captivated. It was unlike anything I'd encountered as a 5th grader. What can you encounter? Right? But it wasn't an Atari game. It wasn't a board game. There weren't, I didn't have miniatures and stuff. There weren't pieces. There was no way to win. It was just like telling stories with your friends. Mostly I looked at, I remember all of the Bill Willingham art and the Errol Otis covers and all of his weird pictures inside. I to this day, I still have a real soft spot for the font Souvenir, which is what that whole book is, laid out in. And I can see Souvenir used places, and I know that, I suspect like they're a BX fan or something. Played that for a little while, graduated up through Star Frontiers, which is another TSR title, sci-fi make-believe. Then I got into more modern stuff. I had TMNT and Other Strangenesses from Palladium Games. Again, really captivated by the art. I was a big fan of the comic. And then played a variety of those, and I remember making my own in games in a little like A6 binder notebook, Caves and Creatures, and just like making up rules and stats and things and sharing it with my friends, and we'd endlessly argue about whether or not they made sense, and got into all of these kinds of conversations that now would be labeled rules lawyering, and and going back and forth on whether it makes sense. I think that was probably the earliest inkling in my unformed mind about the role that like trust kind of plays at the table. And if you can't trust the person running the game, or you can't trust the people playing the game to abide by whatever the ground rules are, then was a Bluey episode, right? Shadowlands, right? Rules are what makes playing a game fun. And I think the sort of trust goes along with that. And rules are there when you don't have high trust, right? An impartial artifact that you can all like refer back to and say, well, the rules say, so that's the arbiter. But in a high trust table, you don't really need that. You can have things make sense in the shared setting, the world that everyone's playing in.
Yeah, but also rules can be fun. So I think it's interesting to hear you describe it that way. I agree about the trust part. Like, it's hard to have fun if you can't trust people. But the more you trust people, I wonder if that's true, that you don't need the rules. I mean, I tend to agree. You maybe don't need them, but it's still kind of fun to like, okay, we all trust each other and we're really agreeing that like this die result means this thing that happens. But maybe even those conventions, are just slowly, the training wheels are falling off the bike as more and more people do more and more narrative work that's different. But yeah, so you've played, I think, a lot of games. I feel like I can say this, and Zach, correct me if this is not something you want to talk about on air, because you have a massive library, like a really cool collection of all of the most obscure, amazing games that I like somehow found a PDF that dropped off the back of the PDF truck but I never, and I maybe remember seeing in the early 90s at the comic book shop, but I never owned. So it was cool to sort of leaf through some of that stuff when we were at a con together and just kind of marveling over. Basically, we were agreeing that many of these are not that fun. You would not want to play it straight, but they're great reads and they have some amazing ideas. So I know OD&D, of course, sure. But like, does anything else jump out as an influence beyond, TMNT, all that early stuff? What, there's a lot of interesting sort of pre-Cambrian, design happening in the 70s and 80s that we just don't talk about on this show, mostly because, again, I don't know, you want to play most of those games straight, but
I think
primordial soup is tough.
Yeah, and this pendulum of complexity and overcorrecting and trying to resolve that dichotomy, right, between high trust and low trust, right? So you see like all through the late 80s and into the 90s, this real blossoming of rule sets, right? We're going to cover every situation so that everybody can have a good time because there's the rule for that situation. And nobody has to get bent out of shape because the judge or referee, DM, GM, whatever, says this in this situation for your character. But last session when Hank did that, you let it work for Hank, kind of thing. And there's, level of impartiality. And then I think with the OSR and into the early 2000s with the explosion of the Powered by the Apocalypse and some of the other indie venues, there's overcorrection back towards that narrative approach, right? It's simplification of the rule set, and let's get back to the story is the reason why we're all here. And I think the truth is somewhere in between. I wrote Journeyman to be a real low-fi rule set that'll let people drive their kinds of stories very narratively. I still play Call of Cthulhu. I play liminal horror. Liminal horror is a vast reduction of something like, it's a Cairn alike, which is an Into the Odd like, which is, but it's it still has rules. It has subsystems. It's so self-referential all the time. It's fractal. So I take your point. I love rules. I do enjoy them. What I wanted out of Journeyman was something that was light enough that it could be applied to any of those source material, any genre, any IP. I have a long-standing theory that the IP games are really only useful as a indexed compilation of gameable content inside that IP world, right? I mean, it's like typically the rules are kind of whatever, especially on there was a company, Leading Edge Games, that they got like the Aliens franchise, they got the Species franchise, I think they had a few others, random IP holdings, and then they applied this really obtuse system to it, but like that was their house system, and they could apply it to all these different things. It used to be apparently ridiculously easy to secure the license to an IP. And
they didn't know the power of RPGs
over the years. Well, and not even that, but all of the ancillary marketing that comes from it now. Now you've got these holding companies that sit there and they dole out little discrete bits, and they know how to milk a franchise for what it's worth. But yeah, something that you could apply a simpler set of rules against a large unwieldy game that still provided all of the juicy bits that described that world. Always appealed. I think personally, people like to rag on it a little bit. It's one of the things I love about GURPS, right? Because the rule set itself is very easily distilled down to something nice and compact, but it expands out to all of these genres and all of these IPs that you can treat in a very mix and match way. Palladium kind of got that way with Rifts, and their system is so internally consistent, or was, and it got kind of crazy in its own right. But it's always been fascinating to me when people try and come up with universal systems, because they're trying to distill down all of the possible actions into a cohesive, coherent set of rules.
Right. And I mean, that's something that, just reading through some of the material on Journeyman, that's kind of something that you're trying to achieve, but kind of like you're saying, the pendulum is swinging in the opposite direction. It has more rules light, as you say, on the Kickstarter and elsewhere, making it very trust-based. But I wanted to dive into that a little bit. How does that work in Journeyman, especially when you're hopping between genres, or even hopping between, if I wanted to do a Star Wars one week and do a Star Trek the next week, how does the system kind of adapt to that?
So the underlying system is it's a 3d6 system. You add up either the highest and lowest, the two lowest, or the two highest, depending on your sort of fictional stance in the moment, right? And that's even if you decide not to go with the default route, which is the referee offers up a devil's bargain, right? I'll let you succeed at whatever you're trying to do, but it's going to cost you X, Y, or Z, and it should be something, right? Ideally that changes the situation or imposes some sort of complication on the protagonist. But if they're like, no, I think I can do this. I want to get a clean success. Then the referee says, okay, well, I think your character is, disadvantaged in the situation, advantaged in the situation, or they've got even odds. And then you roll the dice and compare. That stance is kind of like, if you squint your eyes, it's present in every game that's out there, right? Whether your advantage counts as a +2 to hit, or D&D 5th edition, you've got advantage, you roll 2d20 and choose the highest, or disadvantage the same kind of way and choose the lowest. Those positionings are kind of always there, and they always ultimately distill down to like referee fiat, right? I don't think it's possible for you to hit that target from where you are, and like it's obstructed and whatever. And if you're playing with miniatures, people get out the rulers and the tape, and they see whether they've got line of sight, and all of this kind of stuff that kind of goes away when you're playing theater of the mind. So everyone has to be able to trust that the ref is keeping everything in their head, or that everyone's being clear enough with the description of their positioning what they're trying to do, that everybody can make an informed decision about what their characters are trying to do or how the world is reacting to them. And so to me, I can look at a scenario. I do this with actual plays all the time. I'm listening in to some folks playing. It's pure theater of the mind because I'm just listening in my car. The characters are describing what they're trying to do. The referee is describing the situation that they're in. And in my head, I'm saying, okay, that person has advantage. And so, you know, in my game, if they rolled 3d6 and chose the 2 highest, I wonder what that result would be. And they're, you know, I listen to a lot of Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu, and actual plays, and characters are making choices on skills that differ by, you know, wild percentages, or even sometimes just a hair of a percentage. And it's just so much math for me to have to deal with. Like, and it's usually pretty easy, but then you're talking about like hard successes and extreme successes in case of like Call of Cthulhu, or dealing with, you know, instant criticals or fumbles. And all of those just kind of have felt to me like it puts the game first, right? And comparing numbers and the results and defining degrees of success. And that level of interpretation can be done very quickly, but when it does, when you've got referees who are really adept and who can do that kind of decision on the fly, it became apparent to me, or I'm sure I'm projecting, it became apparent to me that when you can do that on the fly, you kind of don't need a lot of those rules in the first place. And having a simpler rubric for determining success or the applicability of an action in a situation just could lend itself more to the story moving forward than figuring out what the resolution, or how to interpret the resolution and then figuring out what the resolution meant. So it's a very selfish choice because I'm often very lazy.
I mean, I think that's okay. I think as game designers, we all make selfish choices when we're like,
Yeah.
you know, like when writing Danse Macabre, I'm like, well, what do I want to, what do I find interesting? What do I want to see at the table? So yeah, I don't think that there's any value judgment on that.
Yeah. So tell us. So I mean, I'm curious. So you've played a ton of games, and then you're playing your own. You're kind of creating your own super light, you know, version of not quite D&D or GURPS or any of these other things, but something that you find is fun and, you know, has enough range and variance to have stakes and drama, but yeah, it's easy to kind of teach and jump into, develop different stories for. What led you to? So one reason we wanted to have you on is to talk about this sort of first time, because you've read a lot, but I think this is your first game you've published. Is that true? We were kind of talking about
Correct.
that culture.
Yeah, a few adventures, and I've participated in more of the design aspect for a few, but yeah, this is my first fully owned published title.
Yeah, so maybe, I mean, this is really, I mean, Chris, this is something we could talk about with your game as well, but like, what leads you to say, no, I think this is something other people want, or like, I have an idea in mind for a product, like a thing to hold. I mean, one thing with Journeyman, that it's a wee little book, right? So I think that's part of the charm. So I don't know if that came to you fully formed. I don't know if maybe Zach first, but Chris too. Maybe you have thoughts on this. How did you sort of conceive of like, oh no, I know what I want to do now. You know what I mean? Finally.
So a few years back, I participated in a jam, and I think it was called Pocket Places. The sort of the caveat, the gimmick being that you define an adventure or a setting on a single letter sheet of paper that you could like fold up into a pocket mod and then like have a little book. And I collaborated with a friend of mine, David, on that. We're both fans of Manly Wade Wellman and his Silver John stories. Deep Appalachia kind of folk magic and all of this. So we came up with this this place, Yondour Mountain, and statless. It's just describes these places and NPCs and situations, from the town at the bottom of this hill to the highlands leading up, and then an area at the top of the mountain. And super simple, super small, totally enamored me of the format. Like the idea that you could have, you got 8 pages to work with, and that's all you got, right? And it folds up and you're good to go. And so my first version of Journeyman was the Pocket Edition, which is what this Kickstarted version basically became. The beauty of Europe's A-star, paper sizing means that, it's a self-similar aspect ratio. So as you fold an A4 sheet in half, you get an A5 sheet. If you fold an A5 sheet in half, you get an A6. And if you fold an A6 in half, you get an A7. Well, if you do that, if you take an A4 sheet, which is the approximate letter, and you fold it into eighths, then you're down to an A7. So I took that A7, all those A7 page layouts, and just blew it up to an A5. So it's like doubles, quadruples in size. Two orders of magnitude larger, but it preserves the same aspect ratio. So in your layout program, you can just like drag it to the edge, and everything's laid out exactly the same. Super great, except sorry, my dog is learning what is and isn't his. Super great, except when you blow up an 8-page pocket mod book to an A5 booklet, it gets really flimsy. I'm like, okay, this could stand a little bit of fleshing out. So that's where I got myself stuck on some additional material that I signed myself up for additional material that I'm still working on delivering.
So you like nailed it, and then you're like, shit, people want more. Always a good problem.
Well, I wanted more. I had a test print. I had Mixam send me a test print. I'm like, what is this? A role-playing game for ants? And I threw it across the room.
And it flew like a paper airplane. It caught on the wind.
Exactly.
And like lightly just...
Exactly.
Very funny. Yeah. I think to answer your question earlier, for me with DM, a large part of like the initial idea of the game definitely was just what that's it, just kind of making some selfish decisions and being like, well, I love OSR games, I love all the BX clones and everything like that, but like I just don't like Magic, and I don't really like Western fantasy that much anymore. And for me, like I came out of outside of TTRPGs also historical gaming, and so like I always wanted to see more historical basis in games instead of just being like, well, we're going to squish the medieval and Renaissance periods together and just kind of like call it good, whatever. But I think the moment for me when it was like, oh, I should make this into a game, not just like a homebrew thing or something like that, is really just like talking to friends and being like, oh, I have this idea for this setting, and having to be excited about, the basically zombie apocalypse that I'm inserting into history. And I don't know if it was a moment where this is going to be a good product, but I was like, this is a game that people want to play, and I personally want to play and to run. So I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you have some feedback from other people, and you have a sort of self-contained thing that you want to see in the world. As Vex says, when will we finally teach ants to role play? So we have
as soon as we can figure out the internet from Children of Time.
Exactly. We're always saying we need the internet. So you have a game that you want to play yourself, and that starts there, obviously. But then, you get other feedback, and then I think it is interesting to think about the product, which Chris, you and I talk a lot about for your game. But it's interesting Zach, like hearing that you just were enamored of, I also agree. Like there's something really nice about A5 and A6. I don't know that A4 to me looks better than letter, but of course it's cool that it relates to the other A's. And then I love A3 again. It's just like, I'm so letter pilled. But that's a debate for another day.
I'm just so American. I'm so
just when it comes to that, there's like a few American things that, so you decided to basically do a Kickstarter to be able to print not the pocket edition, but this new somewhat expanded edition, which I think will be fun. I'm really looking forward to. I have the pocket edition. I'm looking forward to the final version. How'd that go? I mean, maybe, I don't know, Chris, if you had other questions that, just another question I had is like, how do you get started doing a Kickstarter? And we can also reflect on that, having now muddled through a couple.
My friend John Hambone McGuire of half of Vintage RPG fame,
love that guy,
wrote a small zine called Crowdfund Your Fucking Life and put it out there. I think the PDF is for free on drive-through now and maybe on itch. I don't know, but he's gone through several of them and tried to distill down like what he considers like a surefire process for bringing a successful campaign to launch. And I will say a lot of that was really helpful. Some of it in my case was less. Like he really focuses on like having a video, and I'm like, I don't have a video, I'm not going to shoot one. But the rest of it was all very straightforward, like kind of having an idea ahead of like what your target is, and then based on what your target is, developing your appetite for fulfillment. Like in my case, for Journeyman, I really just wanted a $500. I just wanted to prove that it could happen. And I knew that if I set the bar really low and if I made that, it would likely just make that. And so I think I have like 153 backers, maybe 100 like physical backers. I forget what the numbers are. Don't need a ton for validation. I'm a simple man. But like that's a low enough number that I could receive a shipment from Mixam, stuff them in envelopes myself, glue them shut, stamp them, and send them out. Like that feels like such an easy reach DIY kind of level. Some of the campaigns I see, like it's mind blowing the amount of logistics and operations and orchestration that has to happen. Really impressive. Not my skill set, and I think I would be completely underwater if I had larger ambitions for my projects. But I followed his advice, and even going so far as to wait. Like he suggests launching, I think, on a Tuesday. It's the best day to launch. And so I was like, well, I wanted to get in for Zine Quest, month. But like I did it the last week of Zine Quest on the last Tuesday. So it was like 4 days left of Zine Quest, and like made it by the skin of my teeth. And I kept that bit of advice. I did the rest of it, followed all of the organizational materials for writing up what you're doing, tried to keep it very simple. I looked at some of the campaigns in the past that were not inspirational, but resonated, and used them as kind of a template, and said it seemed to work. It seemed to work on me. And so what can I do to make this work on somebody else? And I was just very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. It's an interesting fact that it's kind of a formula that if you do it pretty much works. I think you still have to be confident you have a thing people want, which is always like a leap of faith to some degree. But obviously in the indie RPG community, people tend to be pretty giving and interested in novelty. So if you do have a good idea and you're very confident in that, I mean, usually you can get at least a few folks to kind of throw you enough money to pick up at least the PDF or like a relatively cheap print copy. And I definitely think it makes sense to start small if you've not fulfilled these things, because the fulfillment, it's just the whole backside is really annoying compared to making the fun games. So I don't know if you're planning on fulfilling yourself, you definitely can, and it can save you money. But it is it's really interesting. I read a great book by Michelle or Michael, I don't know, he says his name, Fifi, the guy who does Copra, the indie comic. It's like an indie superhero comic that's really good. And he was sending out everything himself. He was like printing a comic book himself and sending it out. Like he had like a printer that did the print runs. And then he had just had people subscribe, and he would like mail it to them and to a lot of comic stores. And at some point he switched to working with Image, and then later he switched back. And it was really crazy because he breaks down all the costs of like everything from tape to envelopes, which is exactly where we got into with a larger project where you're fulfilling hundreds and hundreds of things. And you're like, every roll of tape cost me money. And I need like dozens of rolls of tape. And it's just like the math gets like really like lots of small numbers adding up.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun in a way to do that. I think it builds kind of muscle, and it makes you really appreciate the people giving you money, and also just like the whole process is like very time consuming. So I think if you sold 100 zines, like you're Gucci, you'll be fine. But yeah, no, I'm excited for your campaign to have been a success, and for you to fulfill these, and maybe to see what happens next. Maybe to even try some of this journeyman mechanic, roll 3, pick 2. I don't think I've played a game that does that. That's kind of fun.
No, I can't. I was thinking earlier, back when you were describing it, and I actually cannot think of another game that has that kind of central dice rolling mechanic to it.
I'm such a basic person, and I don't remember if it was Thoreau. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And maybe it was Emerson. It was one of the two of them. They were both, whatever. But I was really hung up, right? It started off as 2d6. So it was like Traveler, right? I like Traveler. It's 2d6, aim for 8, and then you're good to go. For a while, I had revisions that brought in powered by the PBTA bands of like degrees of success. I'm like, just, eventually I boiled it down to 2d6, aim for 8. And then if you've got advantage, roll 3d6 and choose the 2 highest. If you've got disadvantage, 3d6, choose the 2 lowest. And I hated the default is roll 2d6 and the others were roll 3d6. I'm like, let's do 3d6. And so I used, I don't know if you are familiar with the website anydice.org.com. .com. It's where you can plug in, some algorithms to sort of get your percentage bands of resolution for success. And I calculated 2d6 aimed against 8 has very slightly better odds than roll 3d6, choose the highest and lowest against 8. And that actually retrofitted into my idea of making the default course of action the devil's bargain, right? So if I, the referee, give you your success, but it's going to cost you something, and you take a look at that and you say, no, I think I'm going to try and do this straight away. And if I say, fine, you've got even odds, your even odds are still slightly worse than even odds, which you could maybe look at that and say that's kind of mean, but I've never been one for the adversarial GM relationship where someone's like trying to beat the players and they're trying to win. It's all collaborative to me. I think that a good referee puts interesting challenges that are worth overcoming, and then should be celebrated for doing that. But I don't think it should be adversarial. But I do think that if the guaranteed success of a devil's bargain at some particular cost is something that you want to avoid, then taking that sort of slightly harder route of rolling dice to see whether or not you succeed. And at that point, I could do away with the PBTA bands, because at that point you've already established what the stakes are. And so you know what failure is going to be. And so if you roll at that point, you're looking for either guaranteed success to do whatever it was you wanted to do in the first place, or failure. And ideally what that's going to look like.
I have not seen any dice, but this is a thing I remember people asking with the grid system early on, was what are the probabilities? And I was like, I'll do that. and I made a table, and I was doing it myself, and I was like, this is annoying, and I just never finished. So this is great. Now I can go back and plug that hole.
Exactly.
Oh my God, Wythe, I say this very lovingly, but you would.
I mean, there's a yeah. I thought, oh, someone asked for this specifically, so like, okay, this must be a thing people care about. But then I was like, I don't care about this. The game works great, so I don't. Who cares? But no, it is interesting to look at these curves. It's a fun site to play with. I never heard of it. Bookmark it.
Yeah, it's got some good functions. You can do highest of and lowest of, and so it's really conducive for playing around with all sorts of weird permutations.
Yeah, those classic Thoreau and Emerson weird dice pools. Yeah, Vex reminds me. Vex was probably one of the folks who was sort of mentioning this. I think Vex and Will Savino, I think, to out them, were interested in probabilities, and I did not know the maths. So yeah, I mean, Chris, do you have questions? I've been hogging all the questions. I'm just going to keep drilling down on Journeyman. But
well, I was also going to ask about Journeyman and more of like your experience at the table. I assume that you're running it for home games and things like that. But I was kind of curious, like, what are some of the genres that you've played around with in the system? And I don't know, does it seems like it would be open enough to encompass sci-fi, fantasy, history, like whatever you kind of want to do with it. But have you found that it works a little bit better, or is it pretty even across what you're trying to do with it genre-wise?
To my mind, the benefit of it is that there's so little there that it's applicable. It's kind of across the board. When I originally wrote it, there's another designer. His name's Colin Clocker, and he wrote Abenteuerspiel, which was kind of a radical simplification of, I think, Blades in the Dark or Trophy Dark. Kind of goes along those routes. You build up a dice pool and you have some other fallout. But the idea there is like the default implied setting, because it's got like rituals and things, equipment and professions are all kind of like quasi medieval world. I had some fun doing some early design work where I took his Pocket Mod and boiled it down to a bookmark. So then the idea is that you can take this bookmark, slot it into any big, fat game that defines both a system and a setting, and then you've got a whole nother set of rules that you could apply to that. And then that's where I wanted to go with Journeyman, was like, I don't know, it's a total act of hubris, right? That why would I spend so much time refining someone else's system into like a bookmark or a card version? Excuse me, my dog is doing something crazy.
Well, now is a good time to say that, Chris, I think we were going to take a couple weeks off here in the middle of summer because we're making a game. So I don't know, podcast-wise, this might be just an on-air question for you. I won't hold you to it if you want to think about it, but the schedule of the podcast might be the same, but the schedule of streams is likely to dip just for a couple weeks. Is that fair to say, something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, listeners, you've heard it here first. We have to do some other things for the end of July. Hey, Zach, you're back. How's your dog?
I'm so sorry. My dog is insane. So he's a new puppy. I just had him for a week. He's still learning boundaries, and he's doing what puppies do best, which is pushing them very, very hard.
What is his favorite dice system?
That's the dog's
He will eat.
dice.
He will eat all of them. He will eat all of them.
Oh, any of them, yeah, because he wants to put them in his mouth. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
D4s are classically the tastiest dice, I find.
Hard to pass.
Yeah, it's like hot sauce.
I was I went for a trip to Borneo, and we went on the trip looking at pitcher plants, and our guide was also showing us ginger, and he kept explaining ginger. It's very easy go in, hard come out. Like, okay, I've kept that with me for as long as I have been around. I'm sorry, I got distracted. We were talking about something.
And let's see, Wythe, you asked a question. I always get distracted.
No, that's all good. I don't recall exactly where we left off. I think we kind of covered some dice, and I was going to ask about some Journeyman questions. I think Chris, you also maybe had a question. I forget.
Yeah,
No,
you had asked me about the
about,
applicability of it.
Yeah, genres, across genres and stuff like that. Yeah.
No favorite genre. The one game that I had played and put some time into with my Tuesday night group was, are you familiar with the Throne of Avarice? There's a game by Soul Muppet Publishing called Best Left Buried, which comprises a couple of different books for players and GMs and some world building. And the world building describes this place that is, it's very sketchily described. Brian Yaksha, who did Rake Hell and some other titles that I'm too embarrassed to remember right now, put together a supplement for Best Left Buried called Throne of Avarice. But it itself is statless. It's not actually, provides no NPC stats. It's just description, lots of tables for creating this very vivid world where, Wythe, I think you'd really enjoy it. It's basically this imposition of a colonialist mercantile state on, these lesser powered lands around them. Well, his whole point, right, was that if you're going to play in this quasi-medieval world, you should know as players, like, are you buying into the system? Are you rebelling against the system? Are you trying to undermine the system? You're not going to beat the system, but like, where are you going to put yourself in relation to it? And so he posits like some places where you can get into this colonial extraction and exploitation of resources, and you work with the locals who are, who are trying to subvert and sabotage that enterprise, kind of thing. Or do you get along with it just to, like, go along to get along and see how well you go, and then gives the referee ample opportunity to throw all sorts of, morally gray things at you until you're questioning your own, sense of well-being in this fictional world. Very well developed, very well written, and a beautiful product to boot. So yeah, that was the first world in which I had my players do some Journeyman. It was just describing their characters, figuring out what they're good at, which is all any character creation process really does, is figure out what you're good at and then, like, boil that down to a couple of sentences rather than a whole page full of stats. And it survived pretty well. Most of the things that I find characters want, even in terms of leveling, is the acquisition of things that they can do. And there's nothing in my mind. There's nothing that really demands that be done in a quantitative fashion, right? Traveler famously has no level progression, has no real skill progression. You get better by getting more stuff, right? You get better ships, you get better equipment. You can train on those long, it's going to take us 8 weeks to go to the next star system. So I'm going to spend that time, studying with the ship's computer and learning some new skills. You can do that. But yeah, it takes time and takes focus away from, like, the adventuring. And so I used that really strongly as a foundation, right? The idea that you can acquire new weapons or new social contacts or new abilities by training for them, or, going on a dungeon delve, or wooing some, lower echelon member of the court and wheedling your way up into a position of trusted power. And, all these kinds of things are rich veins for narrative and story, and none of them have to rely on numbers go up as the way to tell when you've succeeded.
Yeah, I love powers and items as things that players get because they're narrative, or they can be, at least. I mean, you can give someone a +1 sword. It's not super interesting, but you can give them, like, a thing that was really powerful and stolen, and that creates a whole other plot. And then powers, people want to use powers. And if it's just, again, like a small boost, it doesn't matter as much. If you give them the right combo of things for their environment, they're going to want to, they're going to change the way they're playing their character. And that is the mechanic enforcing character growth or progression, right? The person's changing because, my sheet says it, which is, fake, right? But it's also, it's a game. That's like to me, one of the good parts of it being a game is it speeds it up. And especially for non-actors, it just helps, like, okay, I have a cool thing I can do. That's part of me now. I get to use, I'm a guy, right? You guys know the podcast Guys? Like, I'm a guy who can light things on fire with his mind guy. Like, just a typical guy, just lighting shit on fire with his mind. Didn't used to be able to do it. Now I do it all the time. Chris, I don't know if you had other specific questions here. I had some questions, Zach, just real interesting stuff. Art, you're using black and white art. It's a thing in the OSR. I was wondering if you feel free not to say if you're not comfortable. Did you hire an artist? Did you use some public domain art? How did you go about as primarily a writer and GM, getting the goods together there?
Yeah. Oh, let me tell you. So I actually, the cover for Journeyman is a piece of established art by a gentleman named Howard Pyle, who was an illustrator in the early turn of the 20th century. The cover art comes from a book. I think I posted this in one of my last updates. The cover comes from a book called Otto of the Silver Hand. This is actually a really nice anecdote, and I hope you won't mind me sharing it, and I hope the author who told me won't mind me sharing this. So Otto of the Silver Hand is a book that was written in, I want to say, maybe turn of the 20th century, maybe late 1890s. Howard Pyle wrote it and illustrated it, and it's the story of this kid who grows up in the dark ages, the son of a cruel robber baron who had been unaware of the term apart from the rich industrialists of the American, Gilded Age and all of that kind of stuff. Robber barons was actually a term coined all through the Holy Roman Empire outside of the kind of auspices of the emperor. And largely they ran their own small places. Conrad is a duke, so he runs his own little duchy, I guess. Mostly they make their way by intercepting trade. So you're a merchant, you're making all your wares here, you're trying to sell it over there. So you load up your caravan, you go, and then the robber barons swoop down out of the hills. They steal, a third of your stuff as tithe or tax or however they're going to call it. They reduce your, henchman count by 5 by killing off some of your guards, and then they swoop off back to their castle. And now they've got, material to do whatever they want with for the next however long. Turns out this was a real practice until the late in the Holy Roman Empire, where they actually started having kind of a standing army that was able to have wider patrols and bring some of these barons in line. And I guess he was a baron, not a duke. Anyway, this is the story of this young kid who's the son of one of these robber barons, but goes to live in a monastery. So he's raised with all the good graces, and he's a good kid, and brother John takes care of him, and eventually he goes on these little adventures. He gets picked up back by his father when he's a teenager, taken on some of these adventures, meets the emperor, goes to see these battles, and becomes the last line of the book is in Latin. I can't remember it offhand, but it's the silver hand outweighs the hard hand or something like that. It's a feel good kind of a story. It's very short, and I had been lamenting to my wife that I gotta do this. I got to do this extra content for Journeyman. I got to do this, like how to take a work of fiction and pull out gameable content from it and figure out how you're going to use that to define the world that your player characters can like operate in. And she was asking me about the art. She's like, did you hire someone? I'm like, no, it's from this book. She's like, well, have you read the book? I'm like, no, I haven't. Maybe I should do that. So I go and I read the book, and it's also filled with tons of other really great art. He was an amazing line artist. His stuff is just really, really technically very well done. But I read the book. It's very fast read, like I said, and there's tons of stuff that you can pull out and turn into gameable content. So I'm going to use that as the basis for how I sort of define it. I did commission some art from a friend of mine, Harry Bottas. If you're listening, Harry, brilliant stuff. And I was going to, I had in mind, you were talking about future projects. I had in mind a future version of Journeyman that would ship with 3 discrete settings included. The quasi-medieval, woofrup with the serial numbers filed off, and modern day quasi-occult investigation kind of thing, and then space truckers, more death in space or mothership kind of stuff. And so I had him commission me some art for each of those genres. That's all black and white. It's all nostalgia bait for me. It all comes straight from that Moldvay basic, right? All the black and white art inside. It's high contrast. You kind of know there's not a lot of nuance in black and white art. It's very binary, sets the world right like that. And but I ultimately kind of punted on that 3 genre version for what I'm doing now, which is I'll have a guide for extracting content with a sample of how I extract stuff from Otto of the Silver Hand. And then rather than having that sort of workbook inside the main body of the book where you write down one genre, now your copy of Journeyman is stuck to that genre, or whatever, I would provide the workbook as a separate, add-on thing. So then you can make as many as you want. And that drove my idea of a sort of world of play kind of line where you could, I could distribute smaller zines that are just that gameable content for a genre, a setting, or an IP, doing those, I don't know, free or whatever, not to draw lawyers down upon me.
Well, not to bite into potential, sales of the book later on down the line or anything like that. Maybe without giving too much away, can you give us a couple of examples of that process of extraction specific to Journeyman?
Yeah. So the idea behind Journeyman is your character should have 3 aspects. Like kind of, I would say I borrowed the term, from Fate, although Fate takes a narrative approach to aspects. So you define something your character is good at. The example I give in the book is Roderick is a fixer for the DeGroat, crime family. So he's like your dog's body. He goes and makes situations right. He's got a keen eye and really good with the blade. And then you give your characters a special item, something that ideally nobody else like in the world has. It's a key crux to their ability to do things. So he's got a little book of secrets. It's got like names and dishes, info, and all sorts of people around town, right? And I think that with that as enough, you can kind of like apply. The key I had early on was like you had two things they're good at, one a weakness, and then like a special item. And I decided to distill that down because most people really hate playing to weaknesses. In my experience, depending on the table and depending on the game, it's often people fixate on the positive, and I think that's a natural situation for people to be in. So I distilled that down, give them 3 aspects, and the idea being, right, Fezzik in The Princess Bride is a giant, which in many cases would put him in an advantageous positioning unless he were trying to squeeze down an alley, right? That was very narrow and very tight. If he's trying to squeeze between two buildings, he's going to be at a disadvantage. So not all of your aspects are universally advantageous, and not all weaknesses are universally disadvantageous. So I think that having that gives enough of a scaffolding to make some really interesting narrative decisions and put people in some really interesting situations. So in Otto of the Silver Hand, you've got some of these characters are defined by, I don't think they go so far as to be like the greatest swordsman in the world, but there's a character named Schwartz Carl, right? Black Carl. And he's one of Conrad, the Baron's henchman. He carries an arbalest. He's the character on the cover. That's Schwartz Carl. And so like right away, you're like, here's a guy, he's good at sneaking. He's trusted. So he has the ear of someone high up in power. And he's got this arbalest. So he's good at ranged. He's a good hunter or good at distance combat and shooting from the shadows. And so I think that those are kinds of aspects that you could draw out for that as a character. And those situations apply equally for NPCs as for PCs, right? You can distill anything, in my mind, down that kind of way, and then use those to trade off advantages or disadvantages in situations. There are three primary locations defined, maybe two. There's the castle, Draken. I don't know, I have to look it up again. The Dragon's House, which is the Baron Conrad's castle. And there are several places very vividly described. There's a tower along the mountain that kids climb up on and sit on the edge and look down over the city and give them a wide commanding view of the area. It's on a river with some waterfalls. So all of the descriptions of these places like would lend themselves very well to a small contained, hex map of areas that you can operate in. The monastery is located, over here, and it's a few days ride. And so it starts to put these places in juxtaposition to one another. And then you've got these routes, right, between the larger cities of neighboring areas where these robber barons lay prey to, and rivers that run through. And all of a sudden now you've got a place for them to start interacting in, and pulling out dispositions and desires, motivations for all of these NPCs, right? You've got the robber baron. He needs to pay his crew of, men at arms and keep his castle running. So he needs to pull in enough revenue by means of robbing merchants and stuff every month. And so you've got a need there. You've got the merchants who want to make money traveling from place to place and not just losing their gear from these bandits. You've got the church, who is ostensibly an arm of the Holy Roman Church, largely without material power, but with the backing of someone who ultimately does. So they've got their own way of balancing their position in the locale. They want to advise but not get too rambunctious, right? For fear of getting preyed on themselves. So to me, all of those different aspects could be pulled out and describe NPCs. And then you could pull out some of those individual bits and start making, if you wanted to roll up random characters, right, you could start building tables of these characteristics or capabilities, or the items that are brought out, the features, Knave and Cairn and the like, make great hay with randomized physical characteristics as means to like help embody your character with just a few rolls.
That's one of my favorite things about both of those games is rolling for advice and just seeing like, well, am I this son? Am I a liar? What's my thing?
Exactly.
Yeah, I like though in how, like you're saying, like aspects aren't necessarily always positive. They're not necessarily always negative. There's kind of like an quality to that. I'm curious if you develop the rules to give factions aspects. You mentioned like the local church, or you could even think about like, there were, I don't know so much about the Holy Roman Empire, but like, in medieval France, there were kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Coalitions of different dukes, kind of depending on the region that you were from, things like that, and kind of act as one against the king. It strikes me that the aspects are so flexible that you can apply them to discrete NPCs. You can kind of expand it even outward to bigger kind of, governmental or powered bodies, if you will.
Yeah, and that flexibility is, I want to say it's kind of like it goes hand in hand with the malleability of scope that can also come into play. So an example that I have, it's not in the book, it's in a long conversation I had with a friend of mine, David, was you've got your character, they're trying to get someplace really quickly, and then they get stopped by some thug, some ruffian in a back alley, right? They're just trying to go to where they want to go, and now they're stopped. Now, the character for our thief, let's say, they know let's say it's the player playing Roderick the Fixer, right? Good with the blade, knows his way around back alleys, is streetwise and street smart, but he wants to be someplace. He doesn't want to mess around with some thug, and so we can establish the stakes here. Like, I want to wound this guy and get him out of my way so that, I got no beef against this guy. I don't want to kill him, but I want to, leave him hurting and knowing that he shouldn't hurt me. And so the referee can think about that. Like, well, you were really good with the blade. He kind of came out of the shadows. So it's probably about equal. How about, let's say, you put a knife in his shoulder, and in exchange, he's going to give you a deep cut on the hand, right? So it's not going to be a wound. It's not going to cause you any like serious harm, but it's going to hurt, and it's going to maybe give you a disadvantage for things that you want to do with that hand later on. And Roderick thinks about the player playing Roderick thinks about that and says, I don't want, I'm in a hurry and I've got to do stuff with my hand later on. So, maybe we could bring it down in scope and let's start thinking tactically. And smaller actions requiring smaller stakes and allowing you to get really evocative with the thanks, Vex. Get really evocative with the situation and what's going on. And then you could play that out for a couple of different rounds until you get to a point where you could decisively, deal away with somebody because you've already kind of like managed to chip away at it over the course of a couple of interactions. But if he's okay with that, if you could resolve the entire situation in one devil's bargain or one roll, right? Then he may choose to do that because he wants to get on to the next part of the story. And I think operating on factions where you want to deal with the faction as a whole operates really well in this particular regard. And so if you were doing fronts, right, like in Apocalypse World, where you want to have these various factions making larger scale gestures and impact on the world, then you might as the referee not want to just fiat something, but you want to play along just like anything else and roll some dice and say, well, they're really good at, wheedling this kind of result out of people, then I'm going to roll for that. And like, oh yeah, they made some movement along that course of action. I think it's really flexible that way.
No, it sounds fun, and I think one of the more interesting things, Zach, that I think you and I share in common is that focus on trying to figure out both world building and narrative and story, but also like how to mechanicalize it at the right level and being able to adjust and kind of jump around with, as you said, maybe it's not one big bad, but a front which has multiple sort of stages that you're interacting with, mechanically. So it'd be fun to try. Your system does remind me of Fate in that way, the sort of aspects and whatnot. And I think it'd be fun to try like, some journeyman versions of some of the types of things we've been tying to different die types, and somewhat different moves, but trying to get at that same feeling of like, okay, not a lot of math, one big moment where I'm going to roll finally and see what happens. In the meantime, folks can still pick up Journeyman in physical. I mean, I think they'll be able to buy the PDF, right? But if they want to order one from you, if they hear this, you can still go to Kickstarter and order it, because Kickstarter has late pledges now. So it's a whole new day. It's a brand new day.
Capitalize on my laziness and get yourself one before I realize and go through and close down pledges.
But then less lazy in the future because you got to ship one extra copy.
That's future me's problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's a problem for tomorrow, Zach.
You got to get an intern, or I don't know, a son who needs a favor.
Son.
No, I've played games with Zach son. Congrats on the game, and we'll definitely have to play it and hear how it goes. I had one last it might be a major question, but I wonder, Zach, if you have a shorter answer for it, which is a more substantive question. Then Chris, I don't know if you had any other questions, and then we probably will wrap up for time. But my last question was just, why Journeyman? I mean, I think I know why. It sort of implies that sort of level 0. Conan is just a thief, barbarian who's founded finally made it from the wastes to the big city of the snake cultists, and is learning things. I was curious, Zach, if you had other thoughts on sort of the idea of the Journeyman to close this out, and then we'll sort of we'll wrap up.
Yeah, well, I think in that traditional craftsman narrative, right? You've got the apprentice, journeyman, and master stages, and the journeyman is where I really like playing characters. I like characters who are competent. I'm not really a big fan of the 0 to hero anymore. Maybe for a wacky, round of doing like some sort of a funnel that gets a little bit slapstick and madcap, that can be fun, but I don't like playing the low level characters who just can't do anything and they're just trying to stay alive. I like people, as old as I am now, I feel vaguely competent in a few skills. I'm not an adventurer or anything, but there are a couple of things you could ask me to do and I could do them. And I think that's the level that I like playing at. I'm not particularly fond of high-powered play either. So advanced, 5e kinds of games or superhero games. Superhero games are their own genre that is probably well worth a conversation. But overpowered games, that's not really my bag either. It's also a really good Eric Clapton album.
It's a really good it's a really good answer. Yes, the Iron Maiden song, the Eric Clapton album, the medieval designation of competent but not yet the master, the mitre, and in this case, a character who actually, I think the Conan one, I was going to say, oh yeah, that's more like level 0, but no, it's not. You're Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you've killed some snake cultists already, so you're having fun. You have some aspects, muscles, smile. Loincloth. It makes sense. And I tend to agree. I mean, I don't mind higher power characters to start, but I don't like playing very high level. That's why we made Stillfleet the way we did, where it's you start off with a bunch of stuff to do, but with the idea you're not going to gain on 20 levels, right? You're going to die or stop. Something's going to happen well before 20 levels of like it's sort of like the CIA. Like if you went on 20 really horrible black ops, you know, you're the president, right? At that point. Right, you know, not the president anymore. Now it's
a retired
entertainment,
alcoholic, or like...
yeah, you're a retired alcoholic who's now the vice president or whatever. But you're not like on doing field ops. So I think I tend to agree. It's like, what's the point of the 20th level dude who's still swinging a sword? Like, you fucked up. You're doing it wrong. Well, Chris, I'll turn it over to you to close this out. And thanks again, Zach, for coming on.
I was going to say, you either die a level 5 character or you live on to be a robber baron with your own stronghold, if we're going by the BX.
That's right.
OD&D.
That's right. That's right. Domains with a bunch of E's and S's. Yeah.
Yes, the domains. Yes, the all-important. God. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for listening. Thanks so much, Zach, for joining us tonight.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Echoing Wythe, very excited to get my copy of Journeyman. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully we can get some games in soon. That'd be great.
Excellent.
All right. Well, this has been Why We Roll. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see or talk to you next time.
Yep, and you can pick up Journeyman on Kickstarter. Just look for it. And Zach, any last plugs? Anything you wanted to say? Plug.
I'm horrible on social media. I will be attending ArcaneCon in Northampton, Massachusetts, in November, and I'll probably be at Page again in January, and I'll probably be at Geek Flea in New Jersey later in November. So
nice. Well, we hope
come
to
buy
see
books.
you.
I have lots of books for sale.
Lots of good books. We didn't even get to talk about Ringworld and Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing First Edition, all kinds of fun stuff. All right. Well, thanks, Zach. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, thanks everybody for listening.
Bye.
Click in and stream.